Hi, everyone. You're listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM Pittsfield with Roberta McCulloch-Dews of the Mayor's Office in the city of Pittsfield. Thanks for tuning in. So today we have with us Officer Darren Derby with the Pittsfield Police Department. His name is a name that hardly needs an introduction, as he's known to so many in our community and beyond, thanks to his massive social media presence, 160,000 followers across the globe, and a consistent physical presence in our community. He is a law enforcement professional for 21 years, and he has garnered the trust and admiration of community members, young and mature, for his authenticity and caring spirit. Today's conversation is an opportunity to peel back the layers of it and get to know Darren, the person, and all the factors that have shaped him into the individual we know today. So welcome, Darren. Let's get started.
Wow, that is quite the introduction. And before I can go any farther, I feel like I'm live in an NPR radio show. It's the voice. And I told you before, the voice, I needed this calming today, because today is hectic. And I'm like, as soon as you started talking, and with these, I don't know, maybe it's the magic with the microphone, I don't know. And I'm like, all right, I could get into this. This is okay.
For sure.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning to you. All right. So let's see. I always like to set the stage with some biographical information. And I think we got to take it back to your childhood. You ready?
Sure.
Okay. So you were born in North Adams, and you grew up in New Ashford, and you were the youngest of 3 siblings and the only male. Okay?
Correct. Yeah.
So as your sisters were older, I can only imagine that they were probably into things that they didn't want their little brother hanging around. So, you had older sisters, they were probably doing their own thing, and you didn't really have kids in your neighborhood. So what did you do for fun?
It was, I found myself getting into trouble a lot.
Oh, God. Yeah.
My grandparents lived, so we lived literally 2 feet from a brook. It went on the side of our house. So I was always in the brook fishing, but the brooks aren't like they were even 10 years ago, right? They're almost non-existent now.
Yeah.
So I was either fishing with a reel, hand fishing, doing long walks with the dog throughout the woods, just exploring things, looking at old cabins from my great-great-grandparents that used to own the land. They had cows.
Wait, hold on. You can't just say something like that and then we don't expand. So we got to talk about that. The fact is that are you one of those individuals that can say, I am from Berkshire County through and through?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So you can trace your roots all the way back.
I actually have traced my roots on my mother is adopted.
Okay.
So I don't know, her biological family.
Yeah.
I don't really know anything about them. But on my adopted side, my grandparents is a long history of being from New Ashford.
Yeah.
One of them, actually, a great distant relative from 1904, I think, was the chief of police in Pittsfield.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. Last name White. Yeah.
When did you stumble upon that?
So, you get those emails that, hey, check out your heritage. And I didn't submit my blood work. I don't want to go that far. But I think it was a free program called Family Tree.
Yeah.
If that's what it was. I'll have to look.
Yeah.
And I just started putting my name in, my mother, and then my grandparents. And within seconds, no joke, within seconds, I had the tree literally sprouted.
Yeah.
And I had branches going every which way.
Really?
And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I know that person.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, that's my great aunt. And so they're being put together by all of these other, Ancestry.com. They are adding all this stuff, so you don't even have to do half the stuff, and it's free.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm kind of into genealogy too a little bit, but it's a little bit trickier. And so for me, it would all stem back in Jamaica. And I think for right now, what I'm trying to do is actually get information from relatives who are still here, so they can share stories, family names. And I've gone back to a certain extent, so I have some research to do, but it's time consuming. It's a lot.
It is. But I'll tell you this, and after the show, I'll see if I can find the platform.
Yeah.
Everything was there. And it's weird.
Yeah.
To know that all your information's there, you just haven't connected it yet.
Yeah. It's it's interesting, Darren. I don't know if we would necessarily have the same journey.
Well, listen, it's just, you never know where it goes.
It's true. Yeah.
Well, from not being, so you weren't born here.
I was not. I was born in Jamaica.
Definitely more difficult of a situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all right. Well, enough about my genealogy.
Oh, come on, let's keep going.
We want to get back to you. So you know what? Because we're like in the same age range, we're like of the same generation. You're Gen X. You are Gen X. I'm Gen X too.
Sure.
We're a year apart.
Sure.
I know your age, so I won't say.
You could say 44. I don't care.
I will be 44 in January. So we're both from the Gen X generation. And as you're talking about when you're like doing all these things, like of course your parents would send you out to the brook by yourself.
Of course.
Because that's what we did back then.
Hey, we didn't have a cell phone.
There was no cell phone, and it was just as soon as the lights started to go down, then you would head back home. But we were big into adventures. It was all about the adventures, all about, going and exploring.
It was the direct exploration, right? So that physical exploration versus the digital exploration.
Absolutely. And you also had the makings of a mini MacGyver.
I took a lot of things apart, like
somewhat.
Phones, doorbells, VCR, TVs, and I just, I took it apart thinking, okay, I want to see how this works, and then I give in, and then it just sits there.
Did you get overwhelmed when you saw all the stuff in front of you?
Oh, of course, but I didn't know what it looked like until I opened it up. So, fixed, tinkered with small engines, lawnmowers.
How did it work out?
Well, I mean, good. I had a lawnmower with no deck on it that I would ride around in the woods.
But that's still like amazing.
Yeah.
So you were like a little mini MacGyver.
Some days.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so it actually kind of worked out. All right, so you were living this sort of like, is it fair to say country life?
Oh, definitely.
So it was like a country life.
I don't think there was 200 people in the town.
Did you know everyone? Did they know you?
No, my grandparents knew everybody because they're, generational, family.
But here's the thing. You may not know them, but back in those days, people would say, I know who you are.
Oh, of course they did.
I know your parents.
Of course they did.
I know your grandparents. Yeah. It was a way to stay in line.
Yeah, that it did.
All right, so you're having all these explorations and sort of living this life. So you were by yourself a lot, right?
A good chunk of the time, yeah. If my parents weren't home, my sisters, we never got along.
Yeah.
Typical.
Yeah.
I would usually be at my grandparents', which was 100 feet from our house. So they were always keeping an eye on me, and I loved my grandparents. I loved what their life was about, and I loved just the calmness anytime I went there. And they were always, there was no your grandmother and grandfather, they bicker back and forth, right? And it's kind of funny to look at it and see it and hear it, and you're like, wait a minute, you're old. Well, you don't argue,
right?
Like, haven't you figured life out yet?
Right.
And but they were always there for me. But I still ventured away.
When you think about your grandparents, and I think your great grandparents too were a part of your life as well. When you think about them, do you think about like any kind of like scent or something that triggers a memory that you're like, it takes you right back to that time?
So I was lucky enough to grow up with a set of great grandparents, which it's absolutely awesome. And I remember my grandparents and my great grandparents lived in the same. We had basically it was a duplex.
Yeah.
So I was always there. And I would always see my great grandfather, sitting on the front porch with glass windows. Remember those louvered windows? And he would sit in a rocking chair, the older, like 60s, 70s style rocking chair with the metal frame and those straps. And he loved cigars. So anytime I walked into that porch, the stench of cigar. So anytime now, I can still smell it right now. And I can think of it and I go, oh man, I miss that smell.
Yeah.
And even for years after they passed, my grandparents still lived next door, but they had rented the other side. I could still walk onto that porch and still smell.
Yeah.
And I bet you if I walked in there today, it's still there. I bet you if I walked in there today, I could smell it. And a relative of mine now lives there. So
it's so interesting, right? I mean, when we think about our memories of our childhood too, I mean, I think about my grandmother's house. My grandmother's house was like the centralized place where everyone came together.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting though, because like when I was little, the house seemed so big. And then, you know, when I went back after she passed away, after my great aunt passed away, like they're all gone. And the house is now inhabited by, you know, other like tenants. And it just looks different. Everything, I don't know if
it was on a larger scale.
It was,
right? You could hide in the house and you'd be like, oh, they'll never find you. And now you look in there like,
what was I thinking?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'm like,
well, that's because our imagination, right? Our imagination plays a huge key role in how we, you know, transform into adults.
Listen, I think there's something to be said about that whole idea of imagination. It really sets the stage where you really are allowed, you are given license to dream, and you have no distractions. Listen, we had no distractions. I mean, the TV was there.
Nintendo.
We had Nintendo, Sega Genesis,
Atari 64.
Right. We had all those games. And
Coleco.
And listen, back in the day, not everyone had it.
Yep.
So you'd have to go to someone's house, and it was always like a cluster of kids playing at whoever's house had like the latest.
What everybody else had outside of New Ashford, that I did not, was cable.
You didn't have cable?
Nope.
What did you have?
We had those bunny ear things.
Oh, like the antennas.
Yeah. So we had 6 channels.
Right.
Yeah. That's it. Like the majority of my childhood was like bunny ear TV type thing.
Yeah, so let's talk about when you were actually able to like, move the bunny ears one way and you were actually able to get like a channel that came in. And you're like, oh.
Well, we were good because Mount Greylock was usually that closest antenna, so it wasn't too bad. But it was Fox on channel 20, or was it Fox on 23? I think that's where all the cartoons were, and they were always staticky.
Always staticky. You always had the snow, but the fact that it actually came in, you felt like it was true success.
I loved it.
Yes. All right. So you have this, I mean, it seems to me like this really great idyllic childhood in your parents. So your dad, he worked the graveyard shift at GE, and your mom was a mental health worker in North Adams. So what was their parenting style like in those years when you were just growing up? Were they strict, or did they give you a lot of leeway?
Yeah. My father was usually, I don't know, my father was hard, I think. You know, it wasn't, you know, he was my Little League coach for a while, and we butted heads and didn't like that. And so he was always very strong opinion. But my father was always somebody who I looked up to, and I still consider him to be the nicest person I have ever met. I would go into with my father into a bank, and everybody, every woman, every man, every clerk that was working in there would always smile and say, "Hey, Paul, how are you? Hey, Paul, how are you?" And go, "Oh, good morning, ladies, good morning." And I'm like, how does he know all these people?
Right.
And it's just he just smiled all the time. You know, and looking back, I don't know if that was real or if it was just, you know, was it an attempt to hide whatever feelings he had going on, things that I realized later on in life.
I was going to say, because in listening to you, there's a juxtaposition between what you said about him being hard on you and you guys knocking heads, and then seeing his public disposition.
Yeah.
And it's like hindsight is always 20/20.
Yeah, he's never, and you know what? I'm blessed to have his genes when it comes to anger management, the ability to see others, as humans, but he gave me the ability to not want to hate people. And he was never a physical person. My dad was always he was soft-spoken.
Yeah.
And kind of he was laid back, but his words, and he was tough.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like he had a caringness about him. My father is still with us today. We unfortunately don't have a working relationship.
Yeah.
But we're still here, and
But it seems like you took a lot from him, and there are things that are forever a part of you. And I think those things are cemented a lot of times with what we experience, right?
Yeah.
All right. And it also seems like he was a very hard worker. I mean, the fact that he worked a graveyard shift.
Yeah, he worked a lot of overtime. And I, again, as an adult, I can look back and go, okay, that's why he worked a lot of overtime.
Yeah, you probably came from that generation where you just...
that's all they did. That's all they did.
Work.
Well, that's what I got.
Right.
So that was instilled into me. So that's, even when I first started working at the age of 14, I got my working papers. I had 2 jobs, plus school.
Right.
And home life.
Yep.
And that pretty much was the start of having 25 jobs in my life.
That's right.
Yeah.
See, I'm telling you, Darren, the work ethic, I'm telling you, shout out to working papers, right?
Because I can't sit still.
I remember, listen, working papers were the thing because working papers signified freedom. You can finally work and make your own money and buy your own clothes. Whatever you wanted.
My first job, I was worked on a farm in Hancock, where my dad's family was all from.
Yeah.
So I stood. I got to be in the back of the hay wagon, and the hay kicker machine would kick it, and if you didn't turn around quick enough to grab it, it would whack you in the head, and down you'd go.
Did you get a couple of whacks in the head?
Oh yeah. I learned how to drive on the farm. I started with tractors, lawnmowers, and then went to vehicles in the fields. And then eventually worked my way up to an actual job out in the public at Jiminy Peak.
Yeah.
And then I was a shoe salesman at age 16 what
was it? Tom McCann?
Tom McCann at the mall.
Yeah. So when it came,
I know.
Why am I thinking of Married with Children?
Yeah, listen, I knew exactly where you're going with that. You didn't even have to.
Wasn't he a shoe salesman? And he hated his job.
But I loved it.
Did you love it?
I loved it.
What was the best part about being a shoe salesman?
It was working with mature, well, they weren't always mature, adults.
Okay.
And getting responsibility.
Yeah.
Where I then became a third key holder or something.
Right.
And I'm not even graduated from high school, and here I am with all these responsibilities.
Right.
And, it was so much fun. It was so much fun.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best part about the jobs. As we, even when we're kids, right, and teenagers, you think back to the jobs that you had, and you're learning something. Every job,
you don't know that.
You don't know that. I mean, I remember I used to work at Baskin Robbins, and then I don't know how the job came to an end. I feel like there was a very dubious end to it. I don't remember.
Yeah, well, that's probably good then.
I don't know. I don't remember, but I was when I went back to my where my parents live in Westchester, and I was showing my kids, I was like, yeah, the Baskin Robbins used to be over there. I was like, yeah, I used to work there. And then I was like, when did I stop and why?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, but tell me a little bit. Your parents sort of had their way with you, and you were able to have sort of I guess all this responsibility and freedom to some extent.
I was home a lot by myself.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because there was an incident in the woods. And I need you to set the stage about the woods.
So being a young man, I don't even think I was in 3rd grade. I can't remember when. But my grandparents, as lucky as they were hard workers, saved money. They bought a house up in Lake George, right next door, called Bolton Landing.
Okay. And
it wasn't on the lake, but it was across the street, and that was basically what they did during the summertime. So spent a lot of summers up there. They rented to college kids the top floor, so I got to be with more mature people and kind of wandered around. They owned quite a bit of acreage behind, and I began to be a little bit of a pyro. Yeah. I played with matches a lot.
Okay.
And I definitely did some things that I, regret today.
Right.
One of those being that I just wanted to light some leaves on fire. and the leaves turned into good size acreage of a forest fire.
I need to ask you, okay, because again, you're of the generation with what's his little the bear, and
Smokey the Bear.
Yeah. Right? You are of that generation, so you are duly warned about the dangers.
So I was an extremely inquisitive child.
Did fire captivate you looking at it? Because I know some other individuals who
it never captivated me.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know why.
Okay.
I don't know why. I was spoken to a couple of times as a child about playing with fire and matches, and it was shortly after the forest fire that I no longer played with matches or lighters.
Did they know? Did your family know it was you?
So I was just there with my grandparents. So it got out of control, and I'm trying to snuff it out with my feet, and it just kept going and going, and I'm like, oh man. And then because it was a dry summer, and I raced down. It was probably a 5-minute race down through the woods to my grandparents' house, and I fibbed to them and said, Graham, I'm in the woods, and this guy was trying to light leaves on fire, and the forest is on fire. Yeah. So years later, I never admitted it to him. I couldn't. As time goes on, I'm like, there's no way I can't tell them.
Yeah.
I eventually did, and they looked at me and said, well, it's about time you told us the truth. They're like, did you really think we bought that some guy, it's just some random guy, just so happened to be right near you and lit the woods on fire? No, I don't think so. So...
but you carried that with you all those years.
Oh my gosh! It was guilt.
It was guilt.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, because my grandparents gave me everything. There wasn't anything. I mean, I had to work for whatever it was that they gave me. Nothing was for free. But I definitely had to.
Did you feel like you had let them down?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. And that plays a part in my life later on.
Right. Well, and if I could just even stay on that one more time, did you feel like even though you knew later on that they knew, there's something to be said for feeling like I have a second chance because no one knows.
Yeah.
So did you, even though you had the guilt, did you almost feel like you had a reprieve of sorts?
When I told him?
No, because you didn't get in trouble.
Yeah.
Here was this big fire.
I mean, it was huge. It was big. It was probably a good 10 acres. Yeah.
Wow.
But I can't really specifically, point to anything after that. That, where I felt any reprieve or anything like that. I think I always have been someone who, if I did something I wasn't supposed to do, even in adult life, even in work, and I knew it was wrong, that does not disappear.
Right, it stays with you.
It stays with me. That's and that's how I am as a person. So I rarely ever will kind of shy away from the truth because it doesn't feel good.
I hear you.
All
right. For my listeners just tuning in, my guest today is Officer Darren Derby, and we're getting to know him as the individual. And so stay tuned. So listen, when you were in the 4th grade, your family, it's a difficult time because I think there was a shift going on in your family life. And you have shared, the circumstances with your mom. Do you mind sharing it now?
Yeah. So my mother worked in the mental health field. My mother was a CNA, or I think she might have been an LPN. I think she saved a couple of lives in Howard Johnson restaurants. People were choking. My mom was a regular mom. She had her days like any mom. But then my mom started getting sick. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that she wasn't herself. Very angry all the time, laid in bed all the time, smoked like 5 packs of cigarettes a day. Like that's an enormous amount of cigarettes. So she was a chain smoker, just constantly lighting and putting it out, lighting, putting it out. And it was shortly, I don't know, it was probably within a year I realized that she could no longer work, and that's why she was home all the time. She was diagnosed with depression, along with multiple personality disorder, which is now called dissociative disorder, where it took a few years, but we learned through self-education and by her telling us that there were certain personalities that would come out. Some were nice, some were not so nice. So, being in fourth grade, it sounds crazy to even to even fathom that somebody in a fourth grade is experiencing that at home.
Yeah.
I don't regret growing up in that situation. There was some pretty physical, pretty heavy physical altercations with my mother, with my father, with my sisters. Not a lot with me. My mother and I had just a mother-son bond.
Yeah.
And I literally stayed by her side all the time.
All right.
No matter what.
You've said a lot. So I want to unpack it a little bit. This all happened around fourth grade. So you're still young. You're like 9, 10, right? How did you? What was it like when you're at home and you're seeing all of this, but then you have to go to school, you have to be around other people. What were you thinking during that time? How did you reconcile your home life with what you're seeing outside? Because, at some point, did you ask yourself, is this normal? Is this okay? Like, what were you thinking?
I don't know. I knew I knew our family was special.
Yeah.
That, we don't talk about mental health, right? We don't talk about what really goes on in our house. And that still goes true for today. I see kids today that, I can almost like hone in on them that, okay, they got something going on at home. Because I knew the signs that looking back, I can go, okay, well, geez, this was my behavior.
Right.
For the most of the time, I'm spot on.
Yeah.
But it wasn't easy, but at the same time, I don't think I struggled a lot trying to tackle both, as odd as it is. And I think that's partly because of how I grew up. The nature of how I grew up, I was outside all the time. I was by myself a lot. Had my dog and my grandparents.
So you were able to escape.
School was more of my escape.
Okay.
If we can put it that way, that's a good way to put it. So I didn't do good in school. Most of the time I was up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, most nights, school nights, because my mother begged for me to stay up. She threatened to harm herself, and there's only so much that I could do because my sisters were upstairs.
Right.
They didn't care. They'd argue with her. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to poke the bear. So I'm just going to chill. So a lot of times,
because your dad was working,
and she would call him constantly, telling him to come home. He'd come home. They'd get into an argument, and it was all the mental health part that was really driving this. And he eventually, it gets overwhelming.
In many ways, you almost seem like your mom's protector at that age.
Yeah, I felt like it. I felt like it. And up until her passing in 2005, I still felt like that. But it's something that I really, I don't think I ever looked at my childhood as though I was robbed. My childhood as though it wasn't as good as it could have been. I don't know why. What happened.
Yeah.
I understand why my mother became mentally ill. She was abused. I don't know if there was a sexual abuse, but there was physical abuse with her siblings, who I have, she was adopted with one of her sisters.
Yeah.
So they both lived in New Ashford with my grandparents. So I did hear a little bit, about, but never really got into the nitty gritty.
It's a cruel irony because your mom was like, she helped people.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
and then to see what happened to her.
She became a victim of mental illness.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's that sadness there. And I would almost have to glean the fact that, like, because you guys had this bond, it protected you in many ways. Because you said it wasn't the same for your sisters.
No, they were able to kind of do their own thing, and it's really because they were older.
Yeah.
I'm in 4th grade. They were, I think they were 9th. They were a couple years ahead of me, but they went to Mount Greylock, and Mount Greylock, the 7th through 12th is in one school. So they were at the high school when most of this goes on. So their hours were different than mine. Their sleep habits were different. They had older friends, and their parents would come and get them. And and so it was me a lot of the times in the house. I won't say I took the brunt of everything that my mother, was going through, but a good chunk.
So when you talk about, and I think to your point about the childhood and looking back and, it sort of is what it is. It's almost like sometimes when you hear people who say, growing up, we didn't have much, but we were good. Like we were good with what we have. And I think it's to the point where what you have sort of, there's a familiarity. Oh my gosh, that word just went right. There's a comfort level with knowing what you have, right? There's a comfort level with your experience, and for better or for worse.
Yeah, I mean, I had to grow up fast. I didn't. I won't say that I had the worst childhood. I didn't.
Yeah.
That would be a lie. Did I have to grow up much quicker? Absolutely. But in a way, I'm kind of glad that that I was in that situation. And some of my friends, my closest friends, who some of them I still talk to today from childhood, they were aware of what was going on with my mother, and they would be over my house, and I'd have fun, with them and my mother in kind of making light of the situation. I'd go in the other room, and my friend would be in the bedroom, and I'd go in the other room, and my mother's like, "Who's here?" And a really, like, a deep voice, right? And she's like, "Who's here?" And I said, "Ma, you know who that is. That's Travis." And she's like, "Travis? Who's that?" And I said, well, you know who that is. And then she would, a conversation would go somewhere else. And then I'd walk away and come back, and she goes, "Who's in the room with you?" I said, "Oh, that's Bob." "Bob? Yeah, you know Bob." And I would just, looking back on it now, my intention was just because I hated the situation at the time and wanted to elevate her anger. But at the same time, I was able to put my friends more at a comfort level when I could go back there and we were laughing about it.
So you found techniques that work.
Coping mechanisms.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you didn't even realize it.
No. There was a point in my life, I think might have been in 6th grade. It was before middle school, where I had refused to get up at like 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm sleeping, and my mom is pounding on my door. It's those pine doors, solid pine doors. And I'm like, just leave me alone. I just want to go to sleep. My door's locked. And she's just banging and banging and banging, nonstop, wouldn't stop. And then it got quiet, and I can still remember. It got quiet, and then all of a sudden, bang, right on the door. And I'm like, what was that? And I turned my light on, and I had a screwdriver through my door. Took it out, and then did it again. And said, "If you don't come out here, I'm coming in."
Oh, my gosh.
So I just...
Where were your sisters?
Oh, upstairs. Yeah. They're just ignoring her.
Okay.
Yeah. So I opened the door and went out and kind of just chilled on the couch. I slept there while she slept half the time, smoked cigarettes. And so, I had rare incidents where I was ever in fear.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember I don't even think, to be honest with you, I was in fear of my mother. I was feeling fear for her because I've known what she's capable of, given the incidents and the years that have gone by while, her certain personalities would come out and try to harm herself. And, the one that sticks with me forever is because I didn't come out of the room. The next day, she said pretty much, "Are you happy now?" And showed me her arm. And she had taken a cigarette and burned one of her personality's names in her forearm.
Did it stay with her?
It stayed with her until she passed away. Yeah, it was a scar. It was like a raised skin scar. Yeah,
like a brand.
Yeah, literally, you could read the name. Yeah, and finding out later on through therapy with her and her psychiatrist that was that male personality, the angry one that did that, and he did it to her body to really get back at me. So, and then when my mother was herself, she didn't understand. So
it's so it's deep. It's deep and complex.
Yeah, and it I have always wanted to dig deeper.
Yeah.
I was just never an educational person. I think I just recently, got my associate's degree.
Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. But I had D's and F's. I don't even think they have D's and F's now, but whatever. I literally failed. I literally failed.
Yeah.
School every year.
Was it because and did they promote
it was home
you?
life.
Did they promote you even though you failed?
Because I did extra credit stuff, so just enough. They would squeeze it by just enough. I think I probably because they knew my situation.
Yeah.
I never did bad things. I didn't get into fights.
They knew.
A lot of times I was sick. Never went to school. For maybe a couple of days each week because my mother. I'd be up all night. I didn't want to go to school. There's a test. I didn't study. So there was a lot of personal struggles growing up, but none that I felt have really traumatized me. I don't know.
That's fascinating for me to hear because everything that you have just told me, I'm speechless.
You would imagine that I would not be the person that I am today.
Well, let's see. In a way, I could see how it has influenced you. I could see where you have taken the experiences, for better or for worse, and it has informed the way that you police. Because I think that's part of your brand. I think, when people think of your name, a lot of things come to mind, but they think of someone who's caring. They think of someone who goes the extra distance, in making sure that kids are, you have a particular way with kids. They gravitate to you.
I don't get it. So.
Well, it's, I think, it's almost like maybe what you didn't have. Right?
I know where you're going.
You become that thing that you didn't have. You've embodied that in many ways.
Now you're getting deep.
I'm just saying.
You're getting deep. I don't have to go to my therapy session this week. Sweet.
I'm just saying, as I'm listening to you, you have embodied everything that you wish someone was for you.
I think who I am now is, I feel more like a protector. Than a servant, because I know firsthand the struggles that kids are experiencing, and I have said it for years. Once I started getting into the in-depth look at families and their culture and their home life, that kids now are seeing more trauma and experiencing more trauma before their 10th birthday. They're seeing more trauma than a Vietnam vet. And we know how bad that was. And we know that their brains, for the most part, they were 18 years old. Yeah. They were almost fully developed, right? And we know the trauma that they came back with. But as a child, you don't your brain isn't fully developed.
Right.
And the amount of trauma, the deaths in these families, what their living situation is, their parents. I mean, there's more parents now that are battling an addiction, that see things that no kid should ever see going on in the house. And I don't think we've had a generation yet that's developed into adulthood where we've seen, I think we're at the cusp of it, where we're starting to see the result of those childhood traumas that have happened to children. I mean, it explains why we are now seeing a huge increase in childhood mental health, where kids are literally trying to take their life.
And COVID didn't help.
And COVID did not help.
Yeah.
That was another huge struggle. So I just, it's a hard statement to make, but I think it's reality, that, and that's based on my experience with these kids, and their families.
How are you able to, because you're so well known, I could only imagine there's still an aspect of building trust. What are some key things that you do to establish yourself as a trusted person that they know that they can turn to?
The number one thing and the most important thing is to do what you say you're going to do. If I find out it's somebody's birthday and I know they're struggling, I will say, hey, listen, when's your birthday? Or I'd get it a different way without them thinking that I'm going to show up. And I'll figure out the day, and either I make that day by visiting them at school, at the bus stop, when they get off the bus, at home, whether we give them a cake, whether we give them a present, whether we give them a card with a cupcake. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you follow through. That is the biggest hurdle, I think, that when it comes to gaining trust and creating a relationship with that child or family. It's if you say something, say you're going to do something, then do it. Because most of the families, especially the families, but the kids are dealing with is disappointment, people lying to them, whether it's on purpose or not, people trying to shield them from reality when they're not stupid.
Right.
A 5-year-old knows when, somebody says they're going to show up for the 5th time and they don't. Of course they know of course we know what they're thinking.
Right.
So I think being that, and it allows them to, trust someone outside of maybe that tight circle of people.
So, you started your law enforcement career in 2000 when you joined the sheriff's office as a corrections officer. However, you joined the force, I'm going to say, 2000 and the Pittsfield Police Department in 2009?
Yeah, I was sworn in full time.
Sworn in.
Yep.
When you started your career, did you imagine that you would be going down this pathway?
No. I don't think I ever know what my next direction is.
What leads you?
Whatever's happening.
So, okay.
I can't tell you, hey, in 5 years from now, this is what I'm going to, or hey, next week, I've never been able to do that.
Okay. So, all right. So then let's take it down a little bit.
So, like when I worked at the jail, I worked as a corrections officer. I loved it. And I still love that job.
What was the best part of it?
Getting to know people.
Okay.
I learned very, very quickly, but I think it's, again, how I was brought up, that I wasn't there to judge people.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what you did. It didn't matter if you were in there for murder, for molestation. It did not matter. That was not my job. My job was to facilitate a safe and secure environment, and that I took that to heart. So I talked to some of the worst people that you could imagine, that did some heinous things, but I wasn't there to judge them, and I felt as though it wasn't fair if I judged them based on that incident or their lifestyle itself. They're human, and I actually found it interesting to befriend them, and figure out like what's ticking.
So
it takes a special person maybe to not judge people like that.
Well, if I could, going back again to your childhood, where you've had to have this sort of wide berth of understanding, you literally grew up in a situation where you've had to sort of reconcile what was going on around you. So it kind of makes sense. Like, I mean, you could have gone in any direction. You could have gone in a direction of bitterness. You could have and said, but you didn't.
No, that wasn't me.
It wasn't you. And so I think the fact that you apply that same kind of thinking to other people, where you don't judge them, you talked about like the heinous acts and things like that, and people probably are expecting themselves to be judged by others, and you're like, I'm here to listen, and you're throwing people off because they're thinking he's going to judge me.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. Do I have those times? Yeah, I do.
Well, you're human.
Yeah, I am human.
That's right.
There are times where I just can't hold back, and I speak what's going on and speak my mind at someone or towards something. I sometimes regret it, sometimes I don't. But right. I think it's important, and as you pointed out, it's important. I am human, right? Anybody that's wearing this uniform or any uniform, we're human. We all make mistakes, and I think it's always most important to understand that everybody has a parent. Right. Everybody came from someone. Right. Everybody has a family that are affected by their actions. But we don't know what brought them to that situation. And that for me is how I have been able to reconcile many of those relationships that I've created, because we don't know what that person experienced. The kid that's bullying, why is he bullying? Is he a bully? Sure, but why is he bullying? Right. I want to know. And then you find out, well, it's home, right? There's an abusive relationship, or there's only one parent, right? Or there's one parent, but the parent works a lot and is really non-existent, and they're on the street a lot, and they had to stick up for themselves. Maybe that child was always, looked down on by his parents or whoever he lived with. So now he just takes it out on somebody else, because he thinks it's cool, or doesn't think that anybody's going to like him. Right. So he just, he tries to get to them first. And that's usually what it is. Wow. Yeah. Well, we don't grow up to be bullies. We don't. So there are factors. That's right. We don't grow up when we grow up and we are the individuals that we are, we have to look back. We have to look back and see what were those factors that contributed to that, for better or for worse. Because you're right. When you're a little kid, you're just that. Yeah. You're a little kid. Yeah. So why do we do those things? Yeah. Well, I mean, we are a product, for the most part, a product of our surroundings. Yes. So our environment really dictates, unfortunately, right? For some for the good, some for the bad, how and what direction we may take. But that's where we're learning things. And again, that's why I'll always say it. The amount of trauma that you see before your 10th birthday it's everything. It's home life. It's street life. It's the disconnection of families. Where when we grew up, it was, for a lot of times we had a big family. We did. Right? So there was always support somewhere. Yes. And we always went on Sundays to my grandmother's house, where my dad's all his siblings, 7 siblings, they'd all come with their families, and we would just pack the house. Yeah. And Thanksgiving was, come on. Anybody with a big family, Thanksgiving was the best. You're so right about that. I mean, my family wasn't as huge as yours. However, there was something about sort of that consistency and knowing that there was this centralized location. And it's one of the things that, even I think about for our kids, like, we live far away from our families. Yeah. Like, so for Warren and I, it's like, we're it in terms of creating that environment. And we have trusted friends, but it's different. It is. It's different when, growing up, I lived near my grandmother. We lived in the same house at one point. So it was like, there's that
extended family, and there's always like those levels, and I could see
it's
hard.
It's a support system.
It's a support system
that you can't just get outside of family.
You cannot, because family represents that no matter what, they're family, and no matter how many times people say I'll help or I'll do it or you don't.
The intentions are there.
The intentions are there, but no one wants to be a burden, and no one wants to and then that person has to say, I can't do it this week. Yeah. So you don't ask.
Nope.
And then you take it on, and so it's so hard.
And to me, again, I think we can, without a doubt, contribute the lack of family. That family bond is part of one of the issues that we're facing today with behavioral issues.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot, and so it's like what we're trying to do now is fill in the gap, and I think this is, and it's almost like, okay, the wound is open. We see this gaping wound. All right, what are we going to do? Because, pundits have, said, oh, well, why is the wound open? And you're right, and absolutely, and it's like, okay, there's so many reasons, but when that wound is open and it's festering, how are we going to stop the infection from spreading? And I think the work that you're doing,
I appreciate that,
is part of it. I mean, Listen, I think everyone knows what happens on a national scale, and we hear so many stories so many times. And I think we sometimes hear the bad. We know.
Absolutely.
But then we hear the good.
Well, the bad sells.
Right, the bad sells. But it's important that we highlight the good, because what you're doing, whether it's through Operation Copsicle, I always tell people it's more than the ice cream. It's more than ice cream cone.
The ice cream is just an excuse to have a brief interaction. That's right. Positive interaction. That's all it's there for.
That's right. And you're building trust. You have that, and then we have little Officer Winston, and so and he's adorable, looking like he wants to take over Chief Wynn's job, already sitting in the
anything's
seat.
Possibility nowadays.
But when we think about Officer Winston and the whole aspect of what he is there to do, elaborate on his role.
So I just, through social media and being on social media, you started to see all these agencies, especially in New England. It's really huge in New England, where you'd see a comfort dog. And comfort dog? What the heck is that? And then I figure out, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. That is an amazing idea. So it took about 2 years of kind of investigating to all these, issues that departments have had, trying to get them. And it really, I was surprised how quick, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised how quick my conversation with the chief went. He, I think, was way more excited than I was. But then when I said, by the way, Chief, if the dog's going to if I'm going to do all this work, I would like the dog to be assigned to me, right? So then you have union issues and, because now you have other responsibilities. I don't care about that. I just said, Chief, I don't care. I don't care. I don't want anything. I don't need anything.
Right.
I just want to start this program. And so I said, well, I got to talk to my wife, Heather. We had recently lost a dog after 15 years. And I'm like, this is going to be a hard sell. So, I chatted up with her, and first I'm like, I think we might the department's looking at getting a comfort dog, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, today's not the day. So, as time got closer and I'm like, oh man, so can we have a conversation? But I knew this was coming. I knew it. I said, so that's why you've been quiet for the last 2 weeks? Oh, okay. Well, you could have told me about it. Blah, blah, blah. So, I tend to torture her a lot. So, we came to a happy median.
Okay.
And we share custody.
Okay.
So we have him half the week. The chief has him the other half. There's no probate order. There's no nothing. We exchange at the PD, and we love it. I know him and Christina and their newest addition.
Yes.
And their pets. They love the idea.
Yes.
And I could not. This could not have worked out better. But his main role is to just be able to bring calm to people.
Right.
And we know this through studies that animals, dogs in particular, that when you pet the back of a dog's head, it releases the chemical serotonin from your fingertips, right? When you're petting the hair in the back of the dog's head. And it releases serotonin from your fingertips, and the serotonin...
No way.
Yeah, oh, yes. I learned that.
Really?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And serotonin is one of the key elements that makes us happy. So now how I understood it and how I address that with the kids is, hey, who here has a bad day? Blah, everybody raised their hands. Okay, who here has a dog at home? Oh, me. I said, okay, so when you get home and you're having a bad day or a sad day and you're not feeling well, whatever it is, and you're just feeling down, and you have a dog at home, what is the first thing you do when you walk in the house? They're like, oh, I find my dog and I hug my dog. I said, okay. I said, then what? Oh, I want to lay with him and I want to pet him. I said, you want to know why? And this is why. And I said, how does it make you feel after? They're like, oh, it makes me feel good. Well, there you go. Now you know. So it's just, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why I like to keep him fluffy.
Yeah, he is
He's
fluffy.
not your normal poodle, decor-looking dog.
Winston is very fluffy.
Yes.
Very fluffy.
It's a lot of brushing.
A lot of brushing. A lot of grooming.
A lot of hair teasing.
A lot goes into making him look good. A lot. A lot.
He's spoiled. Yeah.
Well, goodness, I feel like there's so much, like so many questions, like I want to ask you,
I know, we haven't gotten to.
and
I
the
know.
time is going down. But if I could, I'm just gonna narrow down to like 2 questions because you mentioned your wife Heather, and
My rock.
and exactly, and I would be remiss if I didn't allow you to have some time to talk about what Heather means to you.
So my wife is the world to me. We met. Another just quirky thing. We met when I was waiting at the Pittsfield Public Library to go over to Mr. Mariano's driving school on Fenn Street to get my driver's license. So I was going to driver's ed. I'm in there with Adam. His father was the head of the library at the time. And we're kind of just chilling and, just being kids. And my wife and her friend or friends were just so happened to be in there.
Yeah.
So we chatted and got to know each other and I think I asked her friend out or her friend asked me out. I don't remember. So we went on like a 2-week dating thing.
Yeah.
And then her friend dumped me, and then it was I wished I could remember the exact moment, but I don't think it was much more than a couple of days. And she called me.
Yeah.
And was like, hey, I'm interested in you, and like, would you go steady and date? And I'm like, oh, sure.
Yeah.
So that was in 10th grade, and we've been together ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a true love story.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she's my rock.
Oh, well, I had to give some time for Heather.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if there was one word that you had to choose to describe you, what would it be?
Handsome. No. As a child told me in school yesterday, somebody asked me why I don't have any hair, and she goes, "Does it matter? He looks handsome." Now this is a 4th grader, and I just laughed. But I think it's. I like the word open.
Okay.
Open because I'm always open-minded.
Okay.
I have an open place for just about anybody that needs a space to listen to be heard, to whatever. Yeah.
You're the first guest that I feel like I need to do a part 2 because there are so many other questions in my head, and I'm like,
we can do a part 2.
We might have to do a part 2.
I talk a lot.
That's good. That's good because sometimes I have guests that are like, yes,
no,
maybe.
No.
So I don't.
We could have did this on one question. So,
but no, this is great. Listen, Officer Derby.
Darren.
Yeah, I can't. Okay.
If I didn't have to wear the uniform, honestly, I would not.
Okay.
If I didn't have to wear my holster, I would not.
All right.
Darren.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate your transparency, your vulnerability, and sharing your story and your truth.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. You've been listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM Pittsfield with Roberta McCulloch-Dews of the Mayor's Office in the city of Pittsfield. Thanks for listening and have a great day.